Hi everyone, and welcome to the CBP Education Team's Ask an Expert webinar, Measuring the Success of Your Career Development Program. My name is Karen Gonzalez, and I'm the Associate Marketing Manager at CBP, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Now today's webinar will run for approximately 90 minutes. During the presentation, if you have questions, please send them to me using the questions function in the webinar controls. Saundra will be pausing throughout the webinar today to answer your questions, and I'll give everyone a chance to send those in during the break. We have two representatives from our education team in attendance today. We have Catherine Rains and Jim Larkin, and they're going to be available to answer questions during the webinar as well. As with all of our webinars, today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out the link to the recording in the next few days. Now please note that the PowerPoint slides are not available for the Ask an Expert series. And also, as you know, as I always say, please don't forget to tweet. I'll be looking out for your tweets using hashtag CBPAAE and retweeting to every one of our followers. Now I'm very happy to welcome, as CBP's Ask an Expert, Saundra Stroope. Saundra is a Human Resources Manager at Intermountain Healthcare. She has 20 years of experience creating HR and development solutions that align with business strategy and achieve results in a variety of industries at global and Fortune 500 companies. Saundra has published over a dozen works and contributed to the chapter Career Development to Engage and Retain High-Potential Emerging Leaders to Integrated Talent Management Scorecards. So please join me in welcoming Saundra as I turn over the webinar to her. Welcome, Saundra.
Thank you for that introduction. So I'm really excited to be here today to share with you some of my experience. Some of the things we'll talk about are how to apply business career development practices to your work with students, the needs assessment process and how to customize that to meet the needs of your program, strategic alignment of your program with students' needs, using the strong interest inventory, and using methods like pre- and post-program surveys, follow-up counseling sessions, and other methods to evaluate behavior change. All of that in an effort to really measure the overall success of your program. So what I'm going to do is start with a little background on my experience. This all started for me back in 2008 when I was working for a large Fortune 500 company that was experiencing a lot of change. And like a lot of us, a lot of uncertainty in the stressful economy. So there really was a lot of uncertainty and change. Part of our challenge was letting people know in the organization that despite the uncertainty, there were career paths and career options available to them. So what we needed to do was really think about how we could engage people in the organization, let them know that there's a future available to them, and really help them define their career options and career path. So we set out to develop a program with some specific goals and objectives. First of all, it was to create a process that allowed for interactions with leaders in the organization, mentors, that really helped them clarify important career issues and identify career paths within the organization. So some of our goals were to help them make career decisions that were meaningful and engaging, help them become more self-reliant and take ownership for their career, help them identify multiple options or manage career change. Also to develop a specific development plan and consider their own work-life balance. These are some of the components of career development that many of you already have in place in your career programs or counseling services. One of the places that I started with my needs assessment was really thinking about each one of these components, identifying the practices that we had in place within the organization, taking a step back and thinking about what was going well and where we needed improvement. So I focused in on the framework and roles, the responsibilities, workshops and development programs that were in place, online resources, the planning process, the availability of leaders and mentors for coaching conversations, using multiple assessments, and then looking at career paths and specific succession plans within the company. The other part of the needs assessment process was taking a step back and looking at the business strategy, what the future was, what our business goals were, and considering that for alignment. Researching those components and thinking about best practice within other organizations and how that compared to ours. It's helpful in the needs assessment process to reach out to people and gather information using a variety of methods. So interviews with key administrators and faculty can also be helpful. Short 30-minute interviews asking questions like, what's the future of the organization? What are some of the changes that are going to impact us within the next 3 to 5 years? What do you believe our strengths are when it comes to the career counseling services that we offer? What are some of the weaknesses? What are the programs or services that we need to develop? And what are the development opportunities that you're aware of that we may not be fully taking advantage of? It's also helpful to include students in that. One way to do that is by using a short survey to identify specific services and preferences that they have for delivery options. Here's an example of a comparison to best practice. So this is a very simple scorecard using a green, yellow, and red key. Just looking at practices or resources that you have in place and using a green score if you've got the service in place and it's working well. Yellow to indicate there's some limited resources in place, but there might be room for improvement. And then red if we don't have that in place at all. So in my experience, I found that, in one area, the framework and process and roles, we had a development planning process that existed, but we really hadn't fully defined it. It wasn't clear what the responsibility of the student was, what the responsibility of the leader was, and how we updated that information and how we utilized it to make decisions. So in that case, the score was red. Here's an example of a short, simple feedback survey. So simple questions that you can ask. The needs assessment survey doesn't need to be more than 10 to 15 questions, something that a student could complete in less than 10 minutes. But asking questions about preferences, whether they prefer to attend a workshop, receive one-on-one counseling sessions, how often they would utilize books and resources or online publications, if they would utilize an online career center, or what services would really add value to them, or any additional comments or questions they have. It's helpful in your surveys to include a numerical or quantitative component, as well as room for comments, so that you can look at specific feedback and comments and also identify trends in the numbers. If you use the same survey year after year or on multiple occasions, you can get a real indicator of improvement. After the needs assessment process, as you're launching a new program or revitalizing your existing program, some of the things to think about are, first of all, how you might involve administrators or faculty in the program. I found in my experience we had a lot of existing programs and services, yet we didn't have a lot of executive leadership sponsorship or involvement in the program. So by involving administrators and faculty, asking them to bring real examples, real stories, do an introduction, or share their expertise during the program, to be involved in communications. You might share an important message in emails that go out or newsletters that go out to students. It really helps drive where you're headed as an institution, and you can link that back to your mission, your vision, and your values. Another piece is the overall framework, the process, the roles, and then multiple assessments that can help define interests. In my case, we use the strong interest inventory. Styles, we utilize the Myers-Briggs to look at style. We also use the CPP values assessment for individuals to really think about their work-life balance and a sense of how that fit in with their overall work and life values. And we used a number of different tools to help people look at their skills, their experience, and the competencies that they needed to develop. All of that information is captured in a career development plan. So thinking about your planning process and what that plan looks like, where it's going to be stored, whether it's a paper plan or something that's online. And then you also need to think about up front how to measure the impact of the overall program and measuring the success. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So one of the assessments that I mentioned was the Strong Interest Inventory. And I know many of you are very familiar with the Strong. This assessment is critical because it really helps people identify what they're truly interested in. It doesn't measure skills or abilities, but we know our interests have the strongest correlation with satisfaction. So it really helps individuals think about what's engaging to them, what kind of work they want to do, and what's really going to keep them interested. The theory behind the Strong is that people of similar interests will be satisfied in similar occupations given everything else is the same, their style, their values, skills, experiences, and competencies. So one of the ways that we used the Strong was to help people identify that work that was of interest. We also used the general occupational themes to align with specific job titles or career paths within the organization. So for example, when we look at the realistic occupational theme, some of the kinds of jobs that were available within the organization would be operations jobs, engineering jobs, or other jobs that really have people doing things on a day-to-day basis. The investigative kind of roles that were available might include quality assurance, research, other scientific related positions. In the artistic theme, communications, graphic artists, other positions that really get people creative and creating things. The social kind of work that we had in our organization included RNs, EMTs, and other positions of that nature. Enterprising titles included human resources, business development, marketing, and in the conventional roles, we had auditing, finance, and other administrative kind of roles. So the Strong really helps people look at the work that they enjoy doing, career fields and career paths or specific jobs that align with that. It also helps them consider educational options that might be beneficial to them, think about their overall work satisfaction, and ideas for balancing their work life. Could be through work activities or other volunteer activities outside of work. We used all of those assessments to help individuals write an ideal job description. So using the Strong to identify the work tasks or phrases in the assessment that really appealed to them. And then think about their skills, the experiences that they've had, as well as those they wanted to gain, and the competencies that really describe them, or those that they wanted to develop. Their style, the kind of work environment that really fits best for their style, and then their overall values, considering work and life considerations that are really important to them. So this is an example of what an ideal job description might look like. Taking all of those pieces into consideration and putting that together and thinking about what my ideal job would be if I could create that job within the organization. Of course, the ideal job is not always available. So in some cases, We also helped people to step back and think about how well their current job aligned with that ideal, and then think about the reality, going back to the business strategy, the change we were experiencing, and where the organization was headed. So it's all a balancing act, thinking about what I truly desire and what's available to me. So Karen, what I'd like to do is pause for questions here.
Great. So we haven't gotten very many in, but we did get one towards the beginning from Jill, and Jill was asking, did you survey employers when you're going through that section?
Oh, that's a good question. We did actually reach out to other employers. So thinking about the needs assessment process and reaching out to do research with other organizations around best practice, what I did in my situation is I actually looked at other organizations that were within my industry and reached out through professional associations. So, you know, within your environment, you might think about associations like NACE or other career planning organizations that you are a member of. You might also think about other schools or universities within your state or within your area.
Great, thank you. And so we don't have many more in, but we're getting several questions about the PowerPoint slides, if they'll be available. So we don't make any of the slides available for the Ask an Expert series, but we do record them. So this is being recorded, and we will be posting this in the next couple of days onto our website. So look for this presentation there. So we just got another, let's see, oops, sorry, actually I'm getting questions and they're all moving. So I got one from Sherry. Sherry says, could you ask if she has used alternative images to job description when working with college students, especially when working with students who have never had a job with a description?
So have we used alternative job descriptions? I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question?
Yes, so it says if you have used alternative images to job description when working with college students, especially when working with students who have never had a job with the description.
Yeah, you know, that's a good point. You know, many of the students, never really having worked in a corporate environment, they may not know, you know, what does a job description typically look like. You know, I still think it would be valuable having them look at their strong assessment and think about the work tasks or the phrases in the assessment that really appeal to them, and using the values and Myers-Briggs assessments to think about, you know, based on what I know about myself and my style, if I were to create my ideal environment and how I might interact with others at work, what would that be like for me based on my style? Or if I really think about my values and what I like to do for leisure activities on, you know, a weekly basis or a regular basis, how do I imagine that fitting into my work? You know, so there may be some additional counseling that you do around helping them know what it's like to go into the workforce for the first time. You know, if they've never experienced a full-time work environment. You might talk about things like, you know, in a typical organization, there's an expectation that a full-time position is at least 40 hours a week. But, you know, in some organizations, the hours are much longer. So as you go into an interview process or you think about the kind of job that you want, thinking through that ideal job description or what I hope that my job is like, it can help frame what I'm looking for, and then when I go in my first interview, my first rounds of interviews, it might also help me identify what kind of questions I need to ask, because I could certainly ask questions to the organization about, you know, what's a typical work week like, how often is travel expected, you know, other kinds of things that might be important to me. So I think using the ideal job description would be beneficial, but you may need to do some more counseling around it.
Okay, thank you. I got another, let's see, from James. Is it possible for you to repeat slide number 14, the ideal job description?
The ideal job description, just a sample of it.
Right.
So going back to this is just an example of what an ideal job description might look like. So the instruction that you would give to the student is to think about these 4 components, to think about their interests, and using their strong interest inventory, they can highlight those words or phrases in the inventory that talk about specific work tasks that they are really interested in. So they can use that assessment to really help write this section around their interests. When it comes to the second piece, skills, experiences, and competencies, they might think about past work experience. If they don't have past work experience, they might think about experiences that they've had at school. So it may be something like having a skill of using Microsoft Word programs, or it may be a skill of leading and managing a team, even if it was during a school project. It could be even part-time work that they have had the skill of managing a budget, and that's an experience or an accomplishment that they have done. So this second section, writing the skills, experiences, and competencies section, you really want to ask them to think about what experience they've had, things that they have accomplished, what they've done successfully, and in addition to that, what's the experience that they really want to gain? So this section is focused on the experience that I want in this role. This to help them identify information about their personality, their style, that helps them translate that into the kind of work environment they prefer. So someone, perhaps an introvert, or, perhaps someone with more of a sensing preference might like an environment that's slow-paced, that allows plenty of time for research. They might prefer working alone. So all of those things taken into consideration. When I think about my personal style, how does this translate into the kind of work environment that I want to be in? And then the values piece, we use the CPP values assessment to really have people step back and assess what was important to them at work and in their life. If they know, for example, that time with my family is very important to me, if they're looking at a position that really requires a lot of travel, 100% travel, or so having them step back and think about what's really important to them with their values helps define that 4th piece. And so if you put all 4 of these together, it helps them to identify how closely that job or that position that they may be looking at, how closely that's a fit for their ideal.
Thanks, Saundra. We have several that have come in, and actually based off this one, is it Tanya? She asked, was this for private use or group or administration? It seems very helpful. So speaking of the job description that you just went over.
Yeah, the ideal job description is something that we had each individual write. It was used in a workshop setting as well as one-on-one coaching sessions. And after completing the assessment, using the multiple assessments, it was a way to really assimilate all that information and then translate it into what does this mean in terms of my career options, what's important to me, what kind of job I'm looking for.
Great, yeah, and that's kind of a lead-in for, because Kimberly had asked, was this evaluation within a career center or at a university? And she'd also asked, what kind of a job did the sample job lead to? What next steps do you take in helping the student find the right type of job after the ideal job exercise?
Mm-hmm. So in my experience, I use the ideal job description activity in a corporate environment. So this was in a large Fortune 500 company. And we talked about it in training programs or workshops as well as one-on-one coaching sessions. And how we use that information is really we asked the individual to look at the information, to think about that, to also think about the different roles that were available within the organization. So for example, identifying those different career paths or roles that are aligned with the occupational themes. So if they were interested in an operations role, they might use that ideal job description to compare what they wrote and then actually go on our internal internet and pull a copy of the job description for an operations manager and to see how closely that aligns, or to talk with other people who were performing that job just through building their network and to find out, you know, what do they really do on a day-to-day basis? What is that job really like? So we had them write their ideal job description and then compare that with the organization job descriptions to see which ones were a close match, talk with others in positions that they were interested in to find out more about those roles. And then in terms of their career plan, we put all of that information into a document where we asked them to identify specific short-term career goals, so actions that they would take within the next 1 to 2 years, and then to think about long-term career goals, actions that they could take within the next 3 to 5 years to really manage their career. It was our approach that career ownership really rests with the individual, and so taking all that information, looking at the organization, looking at what was available within the organization, gathering information, building their network, talking with others, exploring the options, and then identifying those specific actions they could take in the short term and in the long term.
Thanks, Saundra. Do you have time for more questions, or should I just hold off till the end?
I think we do have time.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have another here, and you may go over this, but Ebony asked, what are the most important questions to ask when assessing the effectiveness of a career assessment when surveying our student population?
You know what, I think we'll touch on that in the next session. So what we might do is let's talk about the next section, and then maybe we'll come back to that question.
Sounds good.
We need to talk more about that.
Great.
Okay,
thank you. Let's see here. And I got another one here from Linda. So Linda says, our management has a lot of resistance toward career development programs for staff. There isn't a spirit of internal movement. Have you experienced resistance to this initiative with clients, and how did you overcome the reservations on developing staff?
That's a great question. I did experience some resistance initially, and I wouldn't really, maybe it wasn't quite that strong, but some skepticism about the importance of career development. And I will tell you, I believe that one of the reasons behind that is if you think about the challenging economy that we were in back in 2008, a lot of times when you're experiencing stress in the economy, especially in programs related to development, that's where you experience budget cuts and sometimes even reductions in resources and staff, and you face the challenge of limitations, and that's really the state that we were in. And so what was really helpful to me was to take a step back and to think about where the business was headed, to think about the change that the organization was experiencing, and where we hope to be within the next 3 to 5 years. And then as we mapped out the objectives for the program, to really tie those directly to the overall mission of the organization. That certainly, if we were experiencing a lot of change, we needed people who were engaged in the organization, who could help lead and drive that change. And we wanted to retain some of our key people within the organization. So we needed to let them know that they had career options available to them, even though it's a challenging time. Or, you know, at the very least, to let individuals know that there were ways to grow in place. If there wasn't really an opportunity available to advance or to move up within the organization, that there were ways to grow and develop in place in the position that they were in, and that they had support within the organization to put together a development program, and at least someone else to talk to about their career goals and their aspirations. So tying it back to what's important to the institution or the organization that you work for within the next 3 to 5 years. And then the second key thing was really involving the executive leadership team. So I found we'd been offering a number of different programs and services for a number of years, but there wasn't a lot of attention being paid to it. And so by refocusing and involving those individuals in the communications, when we had workshops or training sessions, asking them to do an introduction, asking them to speak about their experiences or to talk about where the organization was headed, it really helped refocus and re-energize and tie it to messages that were important within the organization. So I think if you can involve those key administrators, key faculty, as you relaunch your initiatives, I think that will be extremely valuable.
Okay, and when you were going over the style section where you talked a little bit about the strong being used, Elizabeth had a question, and she asked, would style also include roles using MBTI? And she sent a follow-up question, which is to clarify the last question, would roles related to tasks be part of the style section of the ideal job description?
You know, I think it would be helpful to use the Myers-Briggs in addition to the strong. You know, certainly, you know, for some individuals, it's a lot of information to absorb. So one of the recommendations that I would have, if you have the opportunity for multiple counseling sessions or to use the assessments over a course of time, you may want to give them some time to absorb each one. You know, I found that offering short sessions that allowed for the completion of assessments either before the session and sometimes during the session if it was offered in a group setting, in a training setting, but allowing some time to complete the assessment, receive some coaching, really take the information back, digest it, and then come back for more. I found that spaced learning to be very helpful. So I do believe it's useful to use more than one assessment, to use the strong and the Myers-Briggs, and I believe that could be very helpful. And what was the second part of the question, Karen?
So really, she was just actually clarifying it, so I should have said that. So she was just clarifying the first question that she had, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think we might have time for one more question.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. We had one from Vernice. I'm trying to scroll up here. So Vernice, so how would this work with the students who have not decided on a major and are seeking help?
Wow, you know, I would go back to the idea of that ideal job description, and you might be able to customize that and use it a little bit more generically, and even rather than thinking about a job, thinking about their major or, those kinds of jobs that really interest them. So it may not be a specific job description, but I think going back to those 4 components, helping them map out what kind of work do I really think I'm interested in doing, what are my interests, what's my style, what are some of the skills I have, what am I good at, or what am I proud of in terms of my accomplishments, and what do I hope to accomplish. So I think by customizing that a little bit, they could think more broadly about a major. They could draft that description and then take that and compare that to descriptions of those different career paths or majors within the university. So I would assume that the different schools within the university would have some kind of description of that program. So rather than comparing it to a job description, they might compare it to the description of the program. But I certainly think it would be a useful tool. So this is probably a good time to move on and talk about measuring the overall success of your program.
Okay, and Saundra, sorry, Jim actually just wanted to clarify one thing really quick. Jim, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me? I want to make sure I'm off mute.
Yeah, so speak a little bit louder.
Okay. In relation to the values, the work-life values checklist, which I have found to be very helpful, CPP is actually no longer publishing it.
Oh.
It's a fairly recent development. It went out of print, and I would offer a suggestion that I have used on other occasions, and that is a value card sort. You can write down the values that you want measured on individual cards, and you're unlimited in the number of cards. And when you give the cards to the individual, you ask them to sort them into 3 piles: always use, sometimes use, never use, or bring that value into your process of thinking. And then just have them focus on the always use values, and you can have them narrow it down to 3 or 5 or 7, whatever it is, and then you incorporate those top values into what you're showing as this ideal job description. I think that's a very easy way to get someone to identify their personal values. And what we did in the work-life values is you can do it twice, once in the work environment and once in the home or non-work environment, and identify where there may be some conflict, as you pointed out, the time of travel that you may be asked to do and what you're willing to do. So those, wherever there might be a slight conflict, can be brought into and a really bright light shown on that through that process of comparing what your values are at work and what your values are at home. But I highly agree that it is a very critical element in creating an ideal job description, and then as you move forward to pursuing an actual position. So, sorry about the bad news about the work-life values checklist. That is no longer available through CPP.
And that's too bad. It was a very useful tool, but an activity like the one that you described is also a very easy way to do that. One of the questions that I would have is, are there publications on the CPP website about values, perhaps past publications? Because I think just simply, reading about that information about values and how that assessment was used, or some simple tips
right.
like the one you just shared, would be really valuable.
Right. That we have not focused on that particular area. We do mention it in terms of just using our assessments generally to incorporate the whole idea of values.
Mm-hmm.
But I am not aware of the top of my head of anything on our website that speaks directly to values anymore.
Okay.
I
Well,
will
good to know.
research that, and if I find something out, I will let you know.
Good to know. Thank you.
Okay.
So let's talk about scorecards. Earlier we mentioned that we're going to focus on measuring the overall success of your program. So when we think about a scorecard, thinking broadly, if we think about it, the comparison of a sports competition, really your score is your record of points. And your scorecard is that picture, that score of how well we're doing. So why would you use a scorecard, or why do you need to think about this? First of all, it can really help you justify expenses. We had the question that came up about, sometimes there's a little bit of skepticism, or sometimes there's challenges in introducing new programs or services, or just maintaining your funding and resources that you have. So using a scorecard can help you justify those expenses. Also can help you ensure that you're aligned with your institutional goals, that you are tracking performance, you're demonstrating accountability, you're making improvements along the way. And a key thing that I found, it can help you in communicating your success. I think that oftentimes we're very busy, we're providing very valuable services, we're having great successes, but sometimes we skip the step of going back and sharing that success with key administrators that may be making decisions about future programs, and really communicating those successes out to our students, out to our faculty, and letting people know what it is that we're doing. So thinking about all the ways to measure the success of your services, the levels of evaluation that I like to refer to and rely on come from the work and research of Donald Kirkpatrick and Jack Phillips. So if you're interested in more information, those are great resources to look at. What I looked at are 5 different levels. So first of all, thinking about the first level of success or level of evaluation is, how do the students react to it? What's their satisfaction level? How do they feel after they've attended a counseling session? At level 2, it's looking at learning. So even if they are very satisfied, have I stopped to assess whether or not they've actually learned something about themselves, or whether they have actually identified their next step, or put together a specific plan, or identified what their ideal job might look like. So level 2 is learning. What have they learned from this experience? At a level 3, we're looking at application. So how have they taken the information and used it? They may be satisfied and they may have learned something about themselves, but what did they do with the information? What action did they take within their career plan? And how did it help them? At a level 4, you're looking at overall institutional impact, and at level 5, return on investment, or a comparison of the cost and benefit. So it's helpful to step back and think about, what levels of evaluation am I conducting? How am I really demonstrating the success of my career development initiatives? So here's an example of level 1. So looking at reaction and satisfaction, it might be a simple evaluation form. Could be a paper form that you hand to someone at the end of a coaching session, or it could be a survey that you send out afterwards, asking simple questions to assess the content of the discussion, the counselor, the overall value. Was the information logical? Were the learning activities useful? Did you understand everything that was talked about? Do you feel like there was effective involvement, dialogue, participation? Was the time that we spent appropriate? Was the counselor supportive and helpful, organized? Were all of your questions and concerns addressed? And overall, how do you feel about the service that you were provided? So those are examples of how you would assess your success at a level 1. When we look a little deeper at level 2, we're trying to assess whether or not they actually learned something. So one way to do that is to include in your counseling sessions or in your training that you do, if it's a group session, role plays, quizzes, summaries of information, asking students to summarize back for you information that you've shared with them to really assess whether or not they've learned it accurately. Another way to do that is using surveys, both before and after the session. So this is a sample of some survey questions that you might use. This survey was sent to participants both before and after the program. That way you can do a pre and post comparison of their answer. So these questions were on a 1 to 5 rating scale. Simple questions like, are you able to describe the career development process? Do you know what your role is, what your role of your leader is or your mentor? Are you able to assess your interests, your skills, your competencies? Do you know what tools and resources are available to you? Do you know how to write a specific career development plan? This is also a place where you can ask about actions they've taken since the counseling session or since the group session. So you can see by using the same questions both before and afterwards, you can get a real clear indicator of success. Another way to measure learning is inviting students to a group session after the program. You can include in that session a learning review of key points, key information. You can ask them to share success stories. You can ask them for their challenges. And you can ask additional questions to measure the status of their career plan, just to find out whether or not they've actually taken the actions that they've committed to. So that's a level 2. Here's an example of level 3. So when we get to level 3, we're looking at how have you applied this. You can also include survey questions or discussion questions during learning review sessions or follow-up coaching sessions, counseling sessions, to talk about application of the skills. So by doing that, some of the things that I found is 90 days after the program, 50% said they had clearly defined their career goals. 60% said they'd had discussions with others about their career plan. 90% said they'd made new contacts to build their network, either by reaching out and contacting someone in a job that they were interested in, doing an interview to find out more about that position, or reaching out to find a mentor within the organization or have a conversation with someone else in a career role that they were interested in. 56% developed new skills or competencies by volunteering for new experiences at work or through leisure activities. So it was really nice to see that people were taking action on the career plans that they put together. So one way to put that all together into a scorecard is to summarize that information on one page. Some of the things that you would want to include in your scorecard would be the target audience, how many people you've had use your services, the duration of the counseling sessions or the training that you've provided, your overall objectives, and then a summary of the results. So we've talked about satisfaction at level 1, learning at level 2, the application at level 3. In this summary, you could also include tangible benefits and intangible benefits. So some of those are easier to measure than others. But an example in a corporate environment might be looking at our turnover rate for those who attended the program versus those who didn't, You might think about for your students the number that were able to identify a specific major versus those that went into a general studies kind of program, or those that changed majors within a certain time frame. And then intangible things that you can look at, things like satisfaction, engagement over time. This helps you summarize the information, think about other barriers, and recommendations for improvement. Some of the things to consider when you're looking at a scorecard is, really stepping back and planning for the evaluation process before you implement your new program or as you reevaluate your existing programs. You want to keep it simple. It needs to be simple and easy to understand. There's always other factors that might influence your data, so you want to be conservative when you're reporting your success. You want to involve students, administration, and faculty in the process at the beginning, in the planning, as well as the data collection and in the program itself. And then be sure to communicate those results back to key people. There's a lot more information available in the book. I mentioned earlier that it's Chapter 8. So if you're interested in more detail or more information, the name of the book is Integrated Talent Management Scorecards, and there are lots of other examples from other organizations in the book as well. So Karen, I think this is a good time for questions and answers.
Yeah, and actually, why don't we go ahead? I'll go over the last few slides, and then I'll start with the questions. So, do you mind just going to the next slide, please?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we have up here the Strong Certification Program that's provided by Judy Gruder at GS Consultants. They offer the Strong Certification online, and they also offer it in Lake Tahoe every June, which is awesome. If you've never been, you have to go. And I'm a little bit biased, but I loved it. I mean, it's a great program. And actually they offer a promo code as well, so it's CVP14. So just go on gsconsultants.net and you can find a little more information about the programs that they offer. I think on the next slide, please. And we also offer a 10% discount for attending our webinar. So if you use promo code EXPERT1113, you can save on Strong and MBTI materials. The only things that you can't use this on is when you purchase your certificate, so it can't be used on that, or you can't combine it with other promotional offers or apply towards previous purchases. So if you want to place an order, just go ahead to cvp.com, or you can always call us, and there's the 800 number there, and you'll have about 3 weeks to use this offer. I always send out a follow-up email after these webinars just to remind you and just give you this information. So if you don't jot it down, it's okay. I'll just look out for an email from me. Next slide. And this is just information if you happen to be an international customer, so outside of the U.S., this is the website where you would want to go to find out more about products and services that we offer outside of the U.S. So it's just cvp.com/global sales. And next slide. And here, of course, as you know, I'm the social media queen, social media lover here. So these are all of our different sites that we manage for our education market. So for all of you, we have our LinkedIn groups, we have the CVP education team, and we also have the Strong Leaders Inventory, which is one that Judy Gruder manages. We also have our Facebook page, we have Twitter, our blog, and our Pinterest site. And there may be some new folks on this webinar, but starting with the September 26th webinar, we started with a fee for the certificate request. Now, the reason we did this was we want to keep the webinars free. So the webinars will always be free. We strive to keep those as a great resource for everyone. But the added-on fee is now for any certificate request. So that includes if we offer NBCC credits or MBTI Master Practitioner credits, it's all on one certificate. We've changed it a little bit as well as far as the process. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to make it more of a seamless process for you, so you didn't have to wait a month or several weeks to get it because we know we were getting so many requests and we were trying to fulfill these in-house, but it just wasn't working like we wanted it to. So you no longer need to fill out a form to request one. You will automatically be put into 2 buckets, basically. So if you have attended this webinar for an hour or longer, in our system, you will automatically be put into the eligible bucket. So our system automatically tracks all attendees by individual email address and screen viewing time. So if you were to just call, and it's always been this way, but if you were to just call in and not viewed on your screen, we're not able to track that. So always please remember that if you're on a webinar, you have to be viewing it on your screen, on your computer. And those who are not eligible are those who view the webinar for less than 1 hour. So basically, they're not those who did not view it for an hour are not eligible to purchase a certificate. So basically, after this, you will be receiving, if you're eligible, you will be receiving an email with the instructions on how you can go ahead and purchase the certificate. And now this, I always add this in here just to make sure everyone's up to date. But sometimes we get emails from attendees that haven't received our follow-up email. So for example, if you are eligible and you would like to purchase a certificate, you would need to be in our system to receive emails, because if you're opted out, we're not able to contact you. So if you can just go and check your email preferences, that would be great. Just go cbp.com/emailpress. And I always make a note here that while you receive webinar confirmation emails, those actually come through our webinar system, which is called GoToWebinar. So those are not ones that we control, the opt-in and opt-out. So you may still get those, but you may not actually get ours if you're not opted into our CBP system. And here we have your sales team. So we have Jim Arkin, who's on the line now. Jack Powers is usually here. He's not here today. And Catherine Raines. And so we have their information there if you want to contact them or have any questions. Or I know we may not get to all the questions. If we don't, you could feel free to always send them out to them, to answer your questions. We also have an FAQ, so I usually put together a lot of the questions that I get from our attendees, and I put those in that document. So I'm hoping that's helpful. And if you see something that I'm missing, please email me. Just let me know. I love getting emails. So, and I included the source code again along with the discount. So, okay, thank you, Saundra. So I think we're ready for some questions. So let me pull this up. So I did get a few attendees that were asking about the authors that you had mentioned right before you started talking about the scorecards. I believe it was slide 18.
Yeah, so 2 of the authors that I mentioned when we were talking about levels of evaluation, one is Donald Kirkpatrick, and the other is Jack Phillips. And so both of them have published a number of books that are related to measuring the overall impact of development programs. And so I think that, even if you were to go on, your favorite bookstore website and do a search by their names, you could pull up numerous books on the topic of measuring the success of development programs that really talk about levels 1 through 5 and different methods you can use to measure success and communicate that success back to others in the institution.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I have one, it was actually from the previous question and answer portion from Lisa. Lisa sent in my corporate HR experience, career development was geared to the company's needs as opposed to individual career goals. What happens when an employee realizes there's a limited opportunity to fulfill their needs?
I think that's a really good question because, if we think about that whole balance of my ideal job or my ideal career and the reality within the organization, sometimes you can have some very meaningful counseling discussions with that individual. And I can give you a story based on my own experience. I was working with someone who was in a role that required a lot of work at a desk. And so they found themselves in an office at a desk a lot of time. They also found themselves working a lot of long hours during the day. when we went through their strong assessment, one of their true interests was in working outdoors. You know, and they found that, you know, maybe my satisfaction is being impacted because I'm not spending time outdoors. And through conversation, we discovered that in his past he had done some volunteering on the side and done things like volunteered as a ski instructor. And so by having that conversation about what's really important to them, what their ideal looks like, and then what's the reality, you can help rebalance that. And sometimes it's not always leaving the organization, but sometimes it might be, is there an activity you can incorporate into your personal life on your weekend that might help you feel more satisfied and more engaged? So in that situation, that individual included in their career plan to rebalance their work time with their leisure activities and to start volunteering again on their weekends, because he wasn't so dissatisfied with his current job. You know, it was a good job, and he enjoyed working in the organization, but there needed to be a little more balance there to feel more engaged. So depending on the reality of the situation and what's available within the organization, you know, one path to take that is to help them rebalance by thinking about their work versus leisure activities. It might be helping them really think outside of their specific career field. And, you know, if you're wanting to retain them in the organization, maybe thinking about different options within other departments that they haven't considered. Or, you know, worst case scenario, you know, it may be that they think about something outside the organization. But I think, you know, really talking about the reality and helping them balance, if you can find that balance through leisure activities, that's one good way to do it, or volunteer through professional organizations, you know, if the goal is really to retain them. Or looking broader. It depends on the size of the organization, but looking at other departments, it's much better to retain them within the organization than to lose them to another organization.
Thanks for that. And just a quick comment, we had gotten, let's see, when we were talking about the values scorecard or card sort, Lorraine let us know that the values card sort is produced by Dr. Nodell, if I'm saying that right. And then Judy, we have Judy Gruder on the line here too. She also mentioned that there's Patrick Kerwin's values survey too, which is excellent for corporate. So just FYI for everybody. We also got in a comment from Dr. Jeff Hart. He says, I've used the strong interest inventory and MBTI career report with strong profile and strong college profile. I'm an MBTI master facilitator, steps 1, 2, and 3, and this may be a factor as to why I might recommend this assessment for high school seniors, college students, and those seeking a career change. Thank you. Let's see here. And I have another question. Let's hear from Jill. So Jill asked, how soon do you post the survey? Likely to remember immediately following, but how about 3 months afterwards?
Mm-hmm. You know, I actually think, based on my experience, all of those are good ideas. I think, you know, if you're looking at the different levels of evaluation and you're thinking about measuring overall satisfaction, you know, kind of that immediate satisfaction, I would say doing a survey immediately after the counseling session or immediately after the group session is really valuable in terms of gauging my reaction right in the moment. But I also think it's a great idea, in addition to that, 3 months afterwards to do a follow-up survey, because at that point in time you can ask additional questions about what are the actions that you've taken since we met? What have you completed on your career plan? What additional questions do you have? Because they often you know, run into challenges when they go back to their day-to-day life as a student or within a company. They run into time constraints and other barriers. So I think the initial evaluation and survey is very important, as well as a follow-up 3 months after. And that could be by using a follow-up survey or by pulling them back in for some conversation and discussion through a one-on-one counseling session or a group session. So I believe all of those are valuable.
Okay, thanks. Another from Cindy. So is there one level of evaluation that is of most or particular interest by clients?
You know, I have found the level 3 evaluation to be extremely valuable. And the reason, this is just my opinion, but the reason I find it to be really valuable is you can ask specific questions about actions people have taken. And I have found when I communicate those results back within the organization and I share that information with leaders, they're really impressed by that information. And I think that the level 3 assessment is a little easier to conduct than a level 4 and 5, where level 4 and 5 are also extremely valuable. It requires a little bit more analysis of information, clearly more time on your part as you think about the overall impact and you think about return on investment or the costs involved. So, you know, I have found level 3 to be extremely valuable because it demonstrates that the services are useful, that they have been used, and it's fairly simple to conduct an evaluation at the level 3 compared to the others.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see, we have a few more. There was another one actually earlier from Sarah. For the younger candidates, would you give a list of jobs that are compatible with the candidate's wish list?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. Once they created that wish list or that ideal job description, we would utilize that information to share with them lists of job descriptions or you know, career paths within the organization that might be a close fit for that. So looking at different positions, you know, for example, depending on their description, it might be that we would provide job descriptions for operations and business development if that was a close match with their wish list. So if you have those kind of descriptions available, I think that's very helpful. It's really up to them to look at that information, you know, evaluate it and take it into consideration. But the more information you can provide, the better off they are.
Great. Okay, that's another from Sarah. This is another Sarah. What do you believe should be the main priorities of a small 1 to 3 person career development office?
Wow, you know, that's a tough question to answer. I would say thinking about it and thinking about that small 1 to 3 person office, first of all, I would think about, you know, where do you want to be in the next 3 to 5 years? If you think about the overall needs of your students, your clients, the people that are coming to you for service, what is it that you really want to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years? So one of the things I would look at is identifying priorities that way. You know, what do our students expect from us? What does our leadership, the people that are running the organization, expect from us in the next 3 to 5 years? So I'd use that information in defining your priority. And then I think, you know, a second priority would be really communicating your successes. You know, it goes back to that whole idea that often we're providing very valuable service. You may have people come in and have counseling sessions that are extremely meaningful to them, but if we don't go back and gather the information, if we don't do some kind of evaluation and gather the data, and then if we don't share that information with our leadership, with our administrators, with those that are making key decisions about our resources, our funding, future resources that we might need, we're not really demonstrating the value of what we provide. So I think the first step would be looking at, where do we want to be 3 to 5 years from now? What's really critically important to us, important to our leadership, our students? And then the second piece I would look at is, have we communicated the value that we have provided back to those key decision makers?
Great. And we got a comment from Judy Gruder, and she says, the carryover of this information from corporate to education is so important. This is key to justifying program funding on college campuses. I can see taking a look at student retention as an evaluation criterion as well, especially for undeclared majors.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Student retention, that would be a great example of a level 4. Looking at the overall impact on the institution. If you can tie the services that you're offering back to the retention of students, that would be a great way to show your success.
That's great. And I got another from Ebony. Ebony, I'll ask the question that you just sent in, but please let me know if we haven't answered the first one that you sent in earlier. But this question is, would assessing all levels in one survey be too much? If so, please break down a reasonable time frame to assess at each level or between each.
I think it might be a challenge to incorporate all levels in one survey just because it's a lot of information. I think for your level 1, if you think about looking at reaction or satisfaction, I think your time frame would be immediate. So immediately after the service that you've provided. So if it's a counseling session that the person has just completed, you might ask them immediately after that session, oh, would you mind answering a few brief questions and giving them a survey at that time. For the level 2, level 2 can really also be incorporated during that immediate program, whether it's a counseling session one-on-one or a group session and more of a workshop or a training session. So with your level 2, what you're really trying to do is determine whether or not they have learned something. So a few key questions, or by asking them to take a short quiz or do a role play with you to assess whether or not they have learned, that might also be immediate. It may be a little bit different format or structure, but you could certainly combine that level 1 and 2 if you wanted to do a short survey after the session. Level 3, looking at application, I would typically think about 90 days after the program. You could also include a survey prior to the program or prior to the counseling session. So depending on how far you schedule in advance, if you're scheduling a person for a counseling session and know that they're coming in to see you in 2 weeks, you might send them a short survey before they come and ask them a few questions. And then, 2 weeks prior to their session, asking those questions, doing the level 1 and level 2 during that session, and then follow up with the level 3 90 days later, I think would be effective timing. For your more complex evaluations, looking at retention rates, looking at overall benefits, doing a return on investment comparison of cost versus benefit, that takes a little bit more analysis. And so, it may take you 6 months to a year after the program to really gather all of that data. So I hope that helped in terms of thinking about a timeline for assessments. It's really an ongoing process. Continually thinking about improvement and thinking about, what your next step might be in continuous improvement of the program.
Thanks. I actually got an email from Nona asking, what response rates do you usually see for your surveys?
You know what, I think some of that depends on the culture of the organization or the institution, and the delivery method for the survey. You know, I will tell you with the level 1 surveys, I have typically had a higher response rate if you do a paper survey and hand it right there to them. You know, if they're sitting right in front of you and you can hand them the paper survey in that moment, you can make sure that you get a 100% response rate. Sometimes, you know, in some settings, we've decided to go with an online survey that's completed later. That's where you tend to get your response rate drops a little bit, but you also have the convenience of not having to put all the data together or you know, reassimilate all the information. So you'll have a bit of a drop if you have that delay in time, and you'll have the additional task of summarizing the data. But typically, if that survey goes out immediately after the session, my response rates have typically been about 70%. The longer that you wait, the lower the response rate gets. If you think about the level 3 survey 90 days later, one of the things that I have found is really helpful is to combine that with an in-person session. So, you know, where your survey response rate might drop off to 50% 90 days later, if you actually invite those people back to a follow-up one-on-one coaching session or a follow-up group session to talk about success stories, to talk about challenges, I think that really helps people re-energize, and I think it helps improve your response rate. So I would say 90 days later, especially if you combine that with some in-person follow-up, I would expect 50 to 70%. But depending on the organization or your students and you know, what their appetite is for surveys, you might see some variation in that.
That's great. Great response. Thank you. So Ebony sent in another. She says, first, thank you for answering both questions. So clarification, we work with large groups of several classes each semester along with individuals, and follow-up can be quite difficult. So my thoughts were that we might at least be able to combine the first 3 levels. However, thank you for the breakdown, as it gives me some reality to communicate back to the powers that be. Thanks, Ebony.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to know. It is hard to do the follow-up when you have a number of you know, different sessions that are running. You have a number of counseling sessions. You have the combination of group versus in-person. You know, and that's often where, like I think I've said a number of times, we get so busy delivering our services we forget to measure our success. But I have found the follow-up to be very useful just in terms of getting support for your overall program. Another way you can utilize that information is to actually share it with your students in the future programs. So up front, letting them know, you know, here's how some of our past students have used this information that I'm going to share with you. Here are some of the things that that they have done. Here are some of the success stories. And you can also protect the confidentiality of the individuals, but may be helpful to some of the people that you're actually delivering your services to hear about how others have benefited.
Thanks. Let's see. We have a question from Mark. Mark says, can you tell us a little more, specifically the book name and full author names where the levels of evaluation are drawn from?
Sure. So the name of the book is called Integrated Talent Management Scorecards, and the authors are Tony DeTunic and Lynn Schmidt. And there are a number of case studies and examples in the book. So my chapter is Chapter 8, and there are a number of different chapters, but the intent of the overall book is really to be a useful and practical guide So every chapter is based on a real case study, a real example that's been used within another organization. So there are numerous examples of how to measure the success of development programs. And they're intended to be things that you can take and you can use and you can replicate within your institution or your organization.
Thank you. I'm going back to a few questions that I had here. And I'm sorry, Catherine had asked, is there a slide that shows what their career paths look like? And I think this was at the beginning, right before we did the first pause for questions. So I guess you're just asking for an example of the career plan of the example that you were showing.
Yeah, I don't think we had a specific slide with a picture of the career plan. But I can tell you a little bit about the tool that we used within the organization that I worked in. We actually had a customized tool because it was one that people were familiar with within our organization. But it was linked to some of our quality improvement programs. So there are a lot of different quality improvement programs that people utilize within organization around lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, other initiatives like that. So we took one of those tools that people in the organization were familiar with, and we customized it to fit career development. It sounds complex, but it's really not. So we used a very simple planning tool that at the top of the tool had the individual think about their overall objective, so thinking about what they really wanted to accomplish related to career, and then it helped them to think about their current state, so where they were currently with respect to themselves, their own development, their own career, and then to identify their ideal state. So the ideal state was that ideal job description. So where do I want to be in the future with my career? And then the next section in our career plan had them identify different options. So after drafting that ideal job description, they had a sense of where they wanted to be by comparing that with different paths within the organization or different jobs that were available. They could identify clearly 2 or 3 different options to explore. And then we had a section to write out specific career development plans. So including specific goals, goals that were realistic and time-bound, kind of this is what I'm going to do, who's going to do it, when they're going to do it, and other people to be involved. So really putting that clearly into a goal with a specific time frame and a due date, and identifying others who could help support that goal. So the last section was a specific goal, short term within the next 1 to 2 years, and long term within the next 3 to 5.
Great. We have a question from Bruce. Bruce is asking, are some of the examples in the book from colleges, university career services department?
There are numerous organizations in the book. That one, I would have to research a little bit and take a look at all the chapters and let you know if there's specific examples tied to universities. So that's a great question. I'd be happy to get back to you on that. But I don't remember right offhand, and I left my copy of my book at home. If I had it, I would look at it right now. But there are just numerous different types of examples. My chapter is on career development. I did notice there's one on mentoring, measuring the success of mentoring programs. There is a chapter on leadership development. So numerous topics related to development from numerous other organizations.
Thanks for that. And Bruce, also feel free to send us an email as well, so we can always follow up with you. Okay, so it looks like we are at the end here. So let's see here. Oh, and actually, and Kim, we're just getting, oh, sorry, we're getting a few more questions. So Kim is asking if we can if they can have your email, Saundra, and I believe you do put it at the end of the presentation.
I did, so I would be happy to share that with you. I'll just go to that slide.
Okay.
My email is saundra.stroope@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to answer questions that you have. I'm also on LinkedIn, so if you're on LinkedIn and want to connect on LinkedIn, you can find me there as well.
Great, thank you. And I think one last question is from Kathleen. Does the book cover how to evaluate your evaluation questions?
Wow, how to evaluate your evaluation. There's a lot of great tips and information for making sure that your evaluation is successful. So I think I would answer that a yes, because there's a lot of really good guidance on how to structure your evaluation method that you use. And I think the key thing is taking all of that information and then thinking about your environment. You know, an effective evaluation within a 3-person career office might look different than a much larger office. So depending on your organization, you know, I would say what's effective has to fit within your environment. But lots of great resources, tips, information, a lot of good guidance in the book.
Thanks, that's great. And one last one, because I didn't want to leave without asking. So Kim had asked, and I'm trying to remember, and I'm so sorry, but I'm going through all these questions. But basically she had asked, what document were you referring to when we were talking about the follow-up email from CBP? And I can't recall what that was. Saundra, do you remember what I was what I was saying at that point?
I am not 100% sure, but I think it might have been one of your slides that you were covering about emails and information available from CPP.
Certificates. Was it certificates?
Might have been the certificate.
This is Vernice is talking about the certificates. So if it was a certificates, then basically just going back to that, what we would do is that we would send, so basically if you're eligible to purchase a certificate, you're going to be getting an email. You'll get an email from us regardless. So we'll look out for a follow-up. But one set of emails is going to have the information on how you can purchase a certificate, and the other set is going to just have information about this, the promo code, and just I want to add in the information that you talked about, Saundra, especially about the authors in the book.
Yeah.
So look out for that. So I hope that answered your question, Kim. I'm very sorry if I didn't. But you can also email me, or email any of us. So please let me know, and I can follow up with that. So unfortunately, we have run out of time today, but I really thank you all for taking your time today to be in on this webinar, and also for all you tweeters, which I love it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Saundra, so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
So if you please join us on December 12th, we will have our next webinar, which will be on Making It Simple, MBTI and Strong Tools in Career Counseling and Academic Advising. And just a quick note, I'm actually not going to be here for that webinar, but we will have, everyone else will be here. This will be a webinar that Judy Gruder will present. And we will have another moderator whose name is Anjane Wright, so she will be taking my place for that webinar. So just FYI, we don't hear my voice or you don't see me tweeting. I'll be back for the next one in February. And also, if you want to register for the webinar that I just said for December, for any others, you can visit our website, which is at cbp.com/askanexpert. And also remember that you can check that same site for all of our previously recorded webinars. So as I said, you'll be getting the follow-up from me with the link to this recording, but if you want to access any other recordings that you may have missed, just go on that site. So again, it's cbp.com/askanexpert.